Eric from PSXboxIndies.com here with another long-form essay about video games. Today's topic is the cult hit, but it really should be mega popular, Earth Defense Force series from Sandlot and D3 Publisher. Just a reminder first though, that we have a lot of these video essays planned on a wide variety of topics, so if you like what you see, please subscribe. As a quick overview, the Earth Defense Force games are mostly third-person shooters, though there are a couple of spin-off games where you take on hordes of giant bugs and spiders and aliens that are invading Earth. The gameplay is usually point-and-shoot simple, but there is a huge variety of weapons to use and a growing number of character classes, all with unique abilities, that keep things interesting and fun. Because of the sheer numbers of enemies on screen at a time, the performance usually isn't smooth, and the graphics are often a generation or two behind. Personally, I think the graphics have always been fine, and have definitely improved over the years, and the performance actually isn't really an issue anymore, especially if you play the backward compatible games on your Xbox One or Xbox Series consoles or on a PS5. Some people will never be satisfied because they think EDF, quote, looks and plays like a PS2 game, unquote. But those people are dumb and wrong and probably smell bad. From a totally objective perspective, yeah, the EDF games are kind of ugly and janky and have had bad performance, and are shallow. I admit it. But they are also super double plus good fun in spite of all those things. You can shut your brain off and just blast away at bugs, and it is incredibly fun and rewarding and satisfying. But every site and every reviewer has a mental hang-up on that and says, "Thou shalt not get higher than a 7. That's nonsense. To me, the Earth Defense Force series is pretty much the video game equivalent of rich and fatty comfort food. You know it's bad for you, / the games have definite flaws, but you keep eating the junk food because it tastes good, and you keep playing EDF because they're pure dumb fun that revel in their distinct video gameness, rather than trying to be serious and realistic or cinematic, like so many AAA games these days. Now let's get to the real meat of this video, where we'll take a brief look at each of the games in the series to see how things have evolved over the years. I would say that they're all worth playing, but that isn't really true because there have been a couple of missteps along the way that you should probably avoid. I suppose I should also note that Jaylaco's 1991 SNES shoot-'em-up Earth Defense Force doesn't have anything to do with Sandlot and D3 Publishers' Earth Defense Force series. Yeah, it's a little confusing. The first EDF game, known in Japan as Chikyu Boegun, which means Earth Defense Forces, go figure, launched in Japan in 2003 as part of the Simple 2000 budget-priced series of games on PlayStation 2. It never released in the US, but it did release in Europe under the title Monster Attack. It is genuinely surprising how much they got right with this first entry in the series. It's undeniably a little rough and clunky and doesn't feel as good as the later games, but the foundation of the franchise was solid from the very start, right down to those distinct EDF sound effects that are still used today. I don't know that it's a must-play other than as a historical curiosity standpoint for fans, but it certainly isn't bad. While Monster Attack was a little rough around the edges and they hadn't quite perfected the EDF formula yet, it was the first game after all. The sequel is kind of stunning in how much it improved to be pretty much exactly what we've come to expect from the franchise. Once again released only in Japan and Europe, EDF 2, known as Global Defense Force in Europe, absolutely nailed it. The gameplay feels good, there are tons of enemies on screen, and the visuals got a nice upgrade over the first game. It also features locations in Europe, which is a fun change of pace compared to the mostly Japanese locales in the rest of the games. It got a remake on PS Vita that actually did get a release in the US, called EDF 2 Invaders from Planet Space. If you can wait a little longer, EDF 2 and 3 have both been announced for release in Japan on Nintendo Switch sometime in 2021, and there is no reason not to expect them to hit the rest of the world too at some point. Whether you play it on PS2, Vita, or wait for the Switch port, I highly recommend giving EDF 2 / Global Defense Force a shot. The next EDF release was the oft-forgotten EDF Tactics in Japan and Global Defense Force Tactics in Europe. It was a turn-based strategy RPG that had you doing... Oh, sorry. I think Global Defense Force Tactics has been lost to the annals of time for a reason. It wasn't very good and got abysmal reviews in Japan at the time. I tried playing it and can't wrap my head around any of it. So, yeah, it was a thing. It's not really similar at all to the other games here, but yes, it was a real EDF game, in the series at least. Moving on. 2006's Earth Defense Force 3 was the first EDF game to see a North American release, as it hit the Xbox 360 with the title Earth Defense Force 2017 in March 2007. For most folks, this was their first EDF, not just because it was the first one to get an actual worldwide hyped up release, but because it was another dramatic step up in quality for the franchise, and is a really great game even nearly 15 years later. The scale of everything was ramped up and the visuals got another bump in quality. It was also the first game that had the more light-hearted and campy tone that most people know the Earth Defense Force franchise for. The first two EDF games are more somber and serious, but EDF 2017 went in a more campy and goofy direction that I think most fans would agree was a wise choice. I have to confess though, that when it first came out and I reviewed it for About.com, I didn't really get the franchise yet. I gave it a 7 out of 10 and complained about clunky controls and ugly graphics and shallow gameplay. That was back when I was still a shitty reviewer and a 7 out of 10 was considered mediocre. Oh, how times have changed. I don't think I'd necessarily give it a different score. We all know that 7 out of 10 is actually a good game these days, but the tone and text of the review would definitely be different. Anyways, I eventually figured it out and can highly recommend EDF 2017. After the very successful release of EDF 2017, D3 Publisher thought the best way to grow the brand even more was to completely toss out everything that made it fun. So they had American developers Vicious Cycle Software make EDF Insect Armageddon in 2011. In their attempt to westernize EDF, they basically turned it into Call of Duty. Suddenly it was serious and realistic and boring instead of cartoony and campy and fun. Suddenly there were mission objectives besides just killing every creepy crawly you saw. Suddenly the dumb, brightly colored bugs were gray and brown and looked realistic. Suddenly there was a lot less enemies on screen at a time. Suddenly the shooting started to feel freaking awful. Suddenly, there were turret sequences and scripted set pieces. This was no longer Earth Defense Force. It was Call of Duty mixed with EDF, but somehow ended up being lesser than the two. It's freaking boring and isn't fun, and I absolutely hate it. For 2013's Earth Defense Force 2025, Sandlot once again took the reins and delivered another classic EDF game that greatly expanded on EDF 2017. And while it was a sort of back-to-basics EDF game again, it really polished the formula to make it the best EDF game yet. It also added different classes of characters in addition to the traditional soldier class, which greatly increased the variety of combat options the game could offer. Though I, stubbornly, still pretty much only play as soldier because I'm scared of change. I said scared. EDF 2025 was so good that it got a PlayStation 4 exclusive port titled EDF 4.1. The Shadow of New Despair in 2015. This release cleaned up the visuals significantly, still kind of PS2-esque, but man are they sharp now, and the performance greatly improved. This was the first new EDF release to skip Xbox platforms in 9 years, a trend that has continued to this day, much to the frustration of Xbox fans. Seriously, why the hell isn't EDF on Xbox anymore? Someone answer me. I tweeted at Phil Spencer that Microsoft should just throw some Game Pass money at D3 Publisher and Sandlot to get EDF back on Xbox, so I'm sure he'll get right on it. And then the Big Daddy greatest EDF game yet came out in late 2017 in Japan, with Earth Defense Force 5 for PS4. EDF 5 basically smooths out all of the rough edges to create the best playing, best looking, best performing, most over-the-top, overwhelming, awesome EDF game yet. Everything was turned up to 11 in this one, which means more enemies on screen than ever before, and the scale of the battles is really something to behold. It also, wisely, tweaked the progression system a bit, so that now you collect armor upgrades and new weapons that are shared amongst all of the different playable classes, which is a huge improvement over past games where you had to grind with each class separately to level them up. Experimenting with the various classes and all of the weapons is a lot easier and more fun in EDF 5, so you're more likely to actually try new things instead of sticking with a soldier in every game like I do. I do think that most of the real quote-unquote EDF games are worth playing, but if I was going to recommend one and only one to a new player, it would definitely be Earth Defense Force 5. A fun spin-off game was also released on PS4 and Steam right before EDF 5 in the form of a shoot-'em-up called EDF 4.1, Wing Diver the Shooter. In this game, you play as a wing diver in a vertical scrolling shooter where you blast away at the same ants and spiders and spaceships as the full EDF games. It's actually super well done and a lot of fun, and I highly recommend it. Earth Defense Force Iron Rain came out 4 months after EDF 5 in spring 2019. The quick turnaround time was because Iron Rain was made by Yuke's of terrible WWE wrestling game fame instead of Sandlot, and was another attempt to westernize Earth Defense Force to make it more mainstream. The result is that Earth Defense Force Iron Rain is the worst EDF game, and it isn't even close. Well, it's sort of close since Insect Armageddon is also a steaming pile, but Insect Armageddon wasn't just straight up insulting to series fans the way Iron Rain is. In an attempt to westernize the series and make it mainstream, Iron Rain basically sucks all the fun out of everything, in favor of dark, gritty blandness, and it freaking sucks. They basically screwed up everything they possibly could. The shooting feels awful and the progression system is totally busted and grindy. And there are dozens of enemies on screen instead of hundreds. And it's dark and serious instead of fun and goofy. This is the second game where they thought the way to make Earth Defense Force more popular worldwide was to make it dark and serious and suck the fun out of it. If you think you need to remove a franchise's entire soul to make it more popular, why even bother? The newest Earth Defense Force game released in spring 2021 on Steam, PS4, and Nintendo Switch, and has developer Yuke's once again taking another swing at making an EDF game. Right away you can tell that EDF World Brothers is different thanks to the blocky Minecraft-esque graphical style. Everything is made out of blocks. The world, your characters, the enemies, everything. And it is brightly colored and crazy. The core gameplay is still the same third person blasting away at bugs and spaceships and aliens, but now the game has a team mechanic where you find and recruit more than 100 different characters and can switch between 4 of them at will during a mission. So you have a variety of weapons and abilities available at all times. It's the first real evolution of Earth Defense Force formula in 20 years, and it works absolutely brilliantly. I really love it. And I'm surprised to say that I love it, because before release I thought it looked awful. Seriously, the screenshots made it look like a visual mess that you couldn't even tell what was going on. But I had FOMO during launch week and bought it on PS4 anyway. And I'm glad I did because it's great. The visuals are great, the sense of humor is classic EDF, but even more ramped up and goofy. And the gameplay still plays like EDF. Earth Defense Force World Brothers is great and highly recommended. And that's it for now. Sandlot is currently plugging away on Earth Defense Force 6, with plans to release it in Japan by the end of 2021. But who knows when it'll get a release anywhere else. No platforms have been announced yet, but it's safe to assume it'll be PlayStation 4 and 5 at the very least. Thanks for watching. I hope I encouraged you to give Earth Defense Force a try because I really do love the series. Please like and subscribe.